Quick reminder, Wi-Fi information and the URL for feedback surveys are on your schedule. Please remember you can send an email to safety@DrupalCorn.org if you have any concerns. If there's an emergency, call 911. Thanks for coming to Twig and Component Libraries today. Please help me welcome Justin Langley, Senior Developer at Code Koalas. Thanks.
Woohoo! So, yeah, I'm Justin Langley, one of the Drupal devs over at Code Koalas. Most of my time spent in the Drupal land. I have done some work on React, Ember, other front-end frameworks. I just like to touch anything that's new or it's a different language that I don't know. So I've got a really big kick about learning anything that I don't understand. I love doing that. It's one of my favorite things to do is actually to find something I don't know how to do and figure it out. So I didn't put my Twitter handle in here because it's literally just reposts from Flutter Dev. So my Twitter's very boring. And something, just small tidbit about me is I could talk with anybody about D&D for like 8 hours at a time. So I'm a huge nerd. So the one thing we're going to talk about is, did anybody here go to Carl's talk yesterday on bricks and components? Great. Did anybody go to Chris Grayton's talk earlier today? Okay. Mine, you can think, was like a continuation of both of those talks. Like Carl talked about how to structure, deciding how you want to, which path you want to take. Chris's was like, hey, if you're going to use paragraphs, you can kind of set them up like this. And then my speech is going to kind of be, great, now that you have all the Drupal configuration, the entities, the paragraphs, all the fields set up, how do you now make Twig templates in that same idea? Instead of having a Twig template that's tied to a particular entity, you just have these standalone Twig templates that you can just kind of throw anywhere in your site. So the problem that this sort of addresses is like, how do you have a front-end theme or developer be able to come into your site and theme at the same time as your Drupal developers actually building the back end of the site? So one method is actually doing what Chris, they kind of do at I think it's H2S? HS2. I think it was like those three numbers. Is you just sort of compact it all together. So you have the template and all the styles and the Twig go with the actual paragraph type, that entity itself. The problem you have with that is if you need to make a new one, you have to build the backend structure first, and then you go and you build the component after. So the problem we tried to solve was we had a couple of front-end themers who are more of HTML, CSS knowledge, especially if you're getting newer people who don't maybe necessarily know Drupal. And the problem is, how do you get them to be able to start working and doing things without necessarily having to wait on the Drupal guy to, well, the view's not there, so I don't know, I can't theme it yet, there's no template for it, I can't really do a whole lot, or the entity type doesn't exist, or this content type isn't there. So the hero is making a component library, and that can mean a lot of different things to a lot of different people. So I'm going to go with what we do, which is there's a module called components, and all it really does in Drupal is you can assign any Twig namespace and point it to any directory you want. So the concept of a component library is really just you have this self-documenting repository of all of these UI elements that then you can reuse however you want. They're not tied to anything Drupal specific. So you can just, if anybody's played with React or done things with like Ember or any like some of the more JavaScript front-end frameworks, that's kind of like the paradigm they go with, is the either you have the display or the containers and the presentation components. And so in Drupal land, we kind of have this idea of these components. They're like standalone, reusable pieces of functionality you can kind of drop in your site. And that kind of boils down to landing pages, reusable pages. So my favorite thing about this is that this highlighted one in orange is what I learned when I did this for the very first time. Was I decided to go plan myself out, see if this worked. And when I got done, all I really did was go in and make a whole bunch of look like simple components. And then when I went to go actually build the Drupal stuff, I found out I had like no styling left to do on my site, which is kind of cool. So like we didn't have this continuous, everybody's always styling something, going back. Now the content type's done, you make the template, great, it's done. Now somebody goes back and styles it, makes it look nice. It kind of happens itself. So there are pros and cons to this approach. The cons aren't necessarily like, oh, these are bad, you shouldn't do this. It's more the things you need to be aware of. So some of the good things are, my favorite one is the very first one, is that you actually have a library of these components that are just predefined. So a brand new dev could come into a site that's already constructed and built, and they could be given, oh, we're adding this new content type, and here's the designs for it. They don't have to redo the wheel or relearn how everything works. Instead, they can go view this entire repository of components, and they can like, great, I need to build this new content type, add these fields, and then I have all of the front-end components I need to use on the site, and I don't need to go back and now create all of this stuff. Styles in JavaScript are going to be co-located with the components, so you can go find the component and everything related to it is right there, so you don't have to go find where else in the code is something doing this. Is there a custom module adding more JavaScript or CSS? The whole idea is all JavaScript, all CSS that goes with the component is located in the same directory, so it's always in the same spot. So then the CSS styles are loaded on a component by component basis. So you have your global styles that you'll need across the site if you've got a global element like your header, your footer, and then the rest of the CSS is loaded as needed using libraries, which is kind of the newer Drupal 8 thing that replaces the like hook library info. You instead use the .libraries YAML, which is cool. And then the last one is that if you're updating components or you need to make like a style fix or something to it, you can just apply it just to the component itself, and then no matter where in your site you're using it, you now have all those new styles, which is kind of neat with this concept. The bad is you do have, it does take a lot more time up front, which I learned the first time trying to do this was I didn't plan myself out well enough, and I ended up making duplicate components or items that I then went back and split them up into other components. So the last time I did this, I definitely spent more time planning it out, so definitely required extra planning at the very beginning of a project. Paid off in the end, but it was definitely something to be aware of. It also, introducing this for people who haven't used it before, it does take some time to learn and get used to, like anything else that's new. You have to learn, great, where are things? How do I make a new component? Where do I put it? Is there a naming pattern? Those kinds of things you kind of have to decide. Best thing is just a piece of documentation or something written that you have for your site that any dev can go to and re-reference. And then the last one was one that definitely bit me a little bit, which was that if you don't do that, then 6 months down the line, when you have somebody come in to help you on a site, you don't have a pattern. And you'll see why this is important, is that the whole concept of this is very much you can kind of decide how you want to structure everything. It's more of a concept and not necessarily like, here's exactly what you do. I'll get to, there's a couple modules you install, and then the rest is where do you want things to go, what kind of directory structure do you want to do, how do you want to handle the templates, and I'll talk a little bit about what we kind of do with that. So these are sort of the biggest benefits I found to using an actual component library, is that people can work at the same time. You have self-documenting front-end UI pieces. Updates are really consistent. When you need to update a component, you don't have to worry about, well, on this page specifically, we added additional styling, or there's a conflict of this guy styled it this way, another guy came in and styled over it. Instead, you have component co-located styles, so anything styling that component is right next to it, so you don't have to worry about hidden CSS files in another directory that may have touched it. And we've spent a lot less time actually styling things because you don't have to do that. You don't have to go back over. I think everybody here has ever styled anything on the front end on anything has always had that pain of you inherit something or somebody styled something, you go back in and they use like 6 selectors, but it was in like another file that actually had nothing to do with what that was. It just got thrown in that file. So you spend a good hour like, where's this style coming from? Maybe it's just me, but that's happened a lot. So that was kind of nice not to have. Visual regression. With this pattern, you can actually use the full suite of tests that Drupal 8 gives you to test your front-end components, but they're very easily testable because they're just UI elements. There's no additional Drupalisms that are inside them. They're just straight Twig templates expecting variables, so they're very easy to test, and they're less likely to have breakage on your site. If you go to update a component, like, oh, we're going to kind of tweak the mobile a little bit, you have a less chance of affecting anything else on your site because you're just touching the styles for that one component. So the module is called components, and it's on Drupal.org. It's actually called component library, but it's actually Drupal.org/project/components. So there's the URL for it, and it really just does one thing. If you look at the module, it is about as simple as it gets. It just registers a in the theme. I can't remember the right term for it. When Drupal actually picks up all the themes and it picks up Twig namespaces, it'll let you define new Twig namespaces in a info.yaml file. That's all it does. So this is an example of if you had a theme. After installing the component libraries module, you would add this component libraries key, the name of your theme, and then this paths key. You can tell it what paths it should look for to find any .twig files. So this is where in your theme you can structure it however you want. There's not a defined way. We kind of go with a little bit of similar to Smack style a little bit with it. We have a src directory, and then there's a components global and layout. So you can have layout, which is nice with the new layout build on 8.6. This is where I'm having a lot of fun with this now. You can put all your layouts there, then you can have your little piecemeal components and components, and then your global is where you could keep, like, if you're making your, like, all the global elements, header, footer, things that appear across the site. So after that, the example is, this is just an example of what I would call a component. So this would be a file called card.twig, and this is all it would have inside it. It's just HTML and it's expecting values. So then here it doesn't matter what Drupal's doing. You just have this sort of piece of HTML and Twig that you can just sort of pass values to. And the next one I'll show you how you'll end up doing that with this method. The idea behind it is that these should be very, very simple, basic, easy to understand. You could go look at the directory of all your components, and it should be easy to understand what each one kind of is just by looking at the HTML. And so an example of this, using it in a template, this is where the magic happens, is that this right here, you have there's the include function with Twig, which is you can just include another template, and with the component libraries before, where we set up that key of the theme and then the paths, that corresponds to this @myThemeName. So what Twig is going to do is it's going to take that @myThemeName, it's going to look for a namespace registry, which you did in the info YAML, and it's going to say, great, it's going to search for your theme name / in my example, which I had was the source components, so that @myThemeName is going to refer to mytheme /source /components, and then it's going to search that directory structure from there. So my actual Twig file would be located at myThemeName /source /components /card /card.twig. And so that's where you can actually have whatever directory structure you want. It's just going to map the @myThemeName to wherever you specified in your info YAML file. And then the with function is kind of where you get this idea of using the component. So this would be like a full node template for an event, content type in card view mode. And you would say, great, just include this Twig template, and then the with expects essentially an object syntax where the key on the left is going to be whatever the value is from the component. So the image is going to map there, and then I'm telling it what value from the actual Drupal entity, node, content type, or node, whatever you're actually using internally, blocks, fields, whatever, you can map values from that template into the value of the component. So this is where you would sort of start treating Drupal as more of a data repository, like, oh, you've defined this content type or a block type or even a field, and then in here, using Drupal's templates, you can treat it as just like, great, it's got all the data for what I need, but I'm actually going to use this Twig component to sort of actually display to the screen. So then you've got this separation of concerns, which is sort of a new hot phrase that's been happening in a lot of the web world, is the separation of concern. You don't want your logic tied to your visual stuff. And so this is that sort of ideology and practice for us, is that, and you can use this with anything. Any template in Drupal that works with, that uses anything, you can just drop these components in. So the big one for us was that we just sort of treat Drupal templates as data mappers. That's really all they do. There's not a whole lot going on in our Drupal templates, except for mapping values to our components where they're needed. And then you can nest it as far as possible. So you could have a component that just actually calls other components that calls other components. So you can go as far deep as you want. And sort of a slight tangent, just because 8.6 just came out fairly recently, and this talk's going to change if I give it again, is that with Layout Builder, you can actually just use that concept of you have the layouts in the very abstract, where you just have defined regions, you can drop them in, and then no matter what you're using as far as mapping, whether you're using like bricks or you're using paragraphs or whatever else you're using, you can still use your Twig component library because it doesn't care about what you're doing in Drupal. The whole idea is all it's doing is expecting data and displaying it. So then Drupal's actually in charge of doing all the logic, pre-processing, getting all the variables right, and then your Twig templates are just dumb templates. All they do is they just want data and they display it, and that's all they do. So this has helped us. The biggest, I think, benefit to this was the testability. Is that you can now easily run a Drupal test, like actually using the full test suite to test things without needing to do a whole lot of like mocking of services or mocking views, or because all of your components, they just want data, so you can feed them whatever you want to test them. You don't have to worry about, oh great, this component is going to render this view or load this dynamic block and send things. You would actually do that in a pre-process on a particular entity and then just pass the data to the component itself. So are there any questions on that before I get into like the next part, which is like my favorite about this? Does anybody have any questions on the idea of this at all? Any clarifications? Cool. So bonus round. The UI patterns module works very much hand in hand with this. So the UI patterns module, just from the actual module page, it allows you to define patterns as Drupal plugins, and then you can drop them in as templates for pretty much anything. If it's an entity type, you can do this from the GUI, or you cannot do it from the GUI. So as an example, it comes with a module called UI patterns field group. So what you could actually do is you could define a Twig component, and I'll show you the next step. You would pretty much create this UI patterns YAML file that defines, okay, these fields have these names and they map to these fields in the template, and then you can go to the manage display of a content type, create a field group, and in that field group say, great, use this component, and then it gives you like data mappers. You can say, great, this Drupal field goes to this field in the component, this field goes into this field on the component. So you actually get the power of like Layout Builder almost just by using the Drupal GUI. So what that looks like is you just have this .uipatterns.yaml file, and you can define what the name is at the top, and then the template and the use are the tricks. So how this works with component libraries is that component libraries registers the Twig namespace is whatever your theme is, and the UI patterns, it's sort of the same ideas. You just either give it, I think it'll take there's another field, there's another value that it uses by default, but if you override the template in the use, you can tell it any Twig template you want it to use. And then here you're just sort of specifying, okay, here are the fields on this sort of pattern, and then the keys underneath, like image and title, those are essentially arbitrary. They can be whatever you want them to be. They're not like a map to a type. It's just for you'll see it's for a display purpose, but then you can, and here specify this. Now Drupal has a plugin called UI patterns. I think it's like UI patterns underscore and the name card that it now knows about. It knows what the fields are. It knows where it's located in your directory system. And so then it can internally map any fields to those values in a component. So what you get from this, from UI patterns, is you actually get like a page called /patterns, and it'll just render every single component you've defined using like the custom namespace, and it'll also give you like the field label type and description that you had defined in your YAML file. So here you can type like the type can be whatever you want it to be, label, description, and the preview, and it actually uses that preview to render the value out. Yes?
Does this replace the need for the template that you use to map to the components? Or do you still need that template?
You would still need the template, because you would still need that my theme name /card/card.twig.
I meant the other one, the
node template that you with the with. You're saying that you could replace that,
Yeah.
correct?
Yeah, and
So
so
this replaces the actual Drupal template that matches the Drupal variables to the.
you wouldn't need to use a Drupal template anymore. You could just do it for managed display, which is pretty neat for people who, like, a lot of this is really cool in that you could actually just know Twig. You wouldn't have to touch anything in Drupal land, and you could get that same flexibility of creating all these front-end components, and then you can map them however you want in Drupal.
So does that eliminate the possibility of using preprocessed functions?
Preprocessed functions will still fire for all of your entity types, so you could still do that to manipulate the data you want.
Okay.
Because all what actually happens under the hood is that UI patterns hooks into the preprocessing of a node, and it just adds a new value essentially to the content. But it sort of grabs that template, maps all the fields, and it creates there's like a new element type it adds called like pattern, and it has that functionality if it knows how to grab all the fields you selected and map them to the right fields, and does the same thing internally, uses that include to grab the template, map the fields, and render it. But you can still do anything on top of that you want. So you can treat managed display, you could leave fields by themselves, you could create a field group, and then it's also, UI Patterns has its own modules for doing that with views. So you could do the same thing. You could actually, in a view, go to like settings in a formatter, and you can say, great, I've got these fields, use this pattern to map the view rows.
So if I had a preprocessed function that created a computed field to pass it into my template, how does that map to this approach? Do I see it anywhere, or do I have to put it in the YAML file?
I think what you would probably have to do in that case is when you're pre-processing, you would create that field,
Right.
and you should have all the information for that pattern. And so you would just, in the pre-process, find that pattern, because all UI Patterns does really, it pre-processes it ahead of time and just sets up that as a new pre-processed value on content, and then you can change whatever you want in it.
Okay.
Does that actually answer your question?
But it wouldn't show up in the mapping well, obviously it would show up in the mapping in the view mode.
Yeah, it wouldn't show up in managed display unless you're using like a display suite field to like calculate, or like a custom field like that. But if you're doing like a pre-process something, you would just do it same way, just when you're pre-processing, when you're done, instead of just setting it to a content value, you would actually, the pattern would be defined there, so you could find it, set the value, and it would render into the template. So, but I was saying that obviously I added a little bit of styling to this page before I did it, but it was kind of like a bunch of components, and then it also adds like a route for every individual component if you wanted to look at it on its own. So it's helpful for things that are like sliders that are much bigger that you might not get if you're, like, this page is constrained to like 1,000 pixels, so if you wanted to see things on a full size, you could view them individually, and it just renders the component and it grabs anything from that preview key. So, yeah, so it looks like we do have some minutes, so I might even show you what the UI looks like to doing that in Drupal land, if my time obviously lets me play nice with the screens. Oh, I have to turn Docker on. That's so sad. Docker's up. Don't think about that when I closed it. It's like, oh. My battery was doing well. No, it's fine. Just like, it was doing well, but I'm turning on Docker, so in about a half an hour, I'll need a power cord. There we go. Okay. Woo! Yay, Docker.
That's why I don't use Docker for Mac.
Well, I should probably check that I
It's from
actually
Linux.
have that container running, so that it sort of close like everything.
Just run a full server.
Right? Yeah.
Yeah. It's just carried around with you.
Oh. I think it's actually.
Like yep. Rack mount one.
There we go. Okay. Now I'm getting the right screen. We're like, great. Now I'm just waiting on Docker to actually load up the Nginx. There we go. This is just the bare bones side that I just spun up. I haven't done anything to, but I'm just gonna create a small. Oh, sorry, I forgot. I was using the Umami, which, by the way, if nobody's used it in 8.6, it's a really cool installation profile just to kind of give you an idea of what Drupal can do. And so it sort of downloads this whole recipe site by default. And I haven't done anything except install Drupal, so that was kind of neat.
Are there actual recipes on the website?
I think they're
yeah,
actual
it creates
real,
like
open source recipes that
Yeah.
so they won't get sued for putting them on there.
Aren't all recipes open source?
No. I mean, you can use them, but you can't like republish them on your site.
Yeah,
They talk
see?
about it at DrupalCorn
like
that they actually
full
come
recipes in
with
case you
their own-
wanted to make a super easy vegetarian pasta bake.
Why
There you
not?
go, right there. Yeah, so I started playing with that too. It's actually super cool to have a demo of what Drupal can do, and you don't have to build a whole site yourself. I'm gonna make sure I actually have that module on. Nope. Sweet. Which is why I had this set up ahead of time. Live demoing is always a good idea. Feel it? Yep, I had a feeling he would throw that screen over there. Alright. Cool. I know what you're thinking.
How much time do you need?
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, I know. Yeah. It's only because I'm running Docker for Mac.
You use Docs, it's a lot faster.
It is a lot faster.
It was not a lot faster when I said that.
And you're doing so wrong.
Probably. I mean, it is very likely that I was. It's just like anytime you run, I'm running using make to run commands inside the container. It's just so slow to do that.
The best thing about this is all of it's being recorded.
Oh yeah.
So
it's my
we can
favorite.
listen to it all as many times.
Like that. So the UI pattern just adds its sort of core API. The library adds the .libraries, or looks for the .info, and then the field group adds the patterns as field groups. So what I'm going to do is oh, yep, that's me not paying attention. Sweet. Cool. So now, 2/patterns. Cool. I just added. So all I did was I went to the Umami. Just love the name of that. It's literally called Umami. Is this? I just added the definition to the. So now clear cache shortcut on the default menu. Hammer it out. That's fine. save all this work I did earlier today, so I'm just gonna do it on the fly. Cool. Just make sure I did that. I'll kind of show what I did here. Just go to the screen here. So I went ahead inside the actual Umami theme itself. I went ahead and in the info.yaml, all I had to do was just add the component libraries, the name, paths look inside components, which is right here, and I just realized that it's going to have to be templates. Such components. So it should find anything in here that has these .ui pattern YAML file that are just defined. One called card, template name is card, the use is going to be card.twig. This helps to look over everything, and I've just defined the title and the image here, which I will then do. Let's go title. Just say under the title and backwards. Image. Great. So now. Always live code on the fly. Hey, right. Because it was null. Great. Spell everything right. Nope, I didn't. Fields. Which is nice. It does actually holler at you. Time. I'm going to be real mad if I go check locally and I've got a different named site where I did all this in. That's probably what I did. I was like, I did all this last night. Okay. Yes! And welcome to Live Coding with Justin.
These are only kind of lazy mathematics.
Yeah.
Oh, now I'm... Oh, yeah. I did something real good now. What is it about?
Well, I can talk about a couple things real quick to buy Justin some time.
Do it.
So one thing that's cool about doing the component style things that I'm assuming he's not mentioning is we had a client that wanted a couple fairly complicated components, and because they were already completely detached components, because they're not Drupal template things, so we were able to slap Vue.js on just a single component and have that be a Vue component. And then all I had to do is I pre-processed some of the fields to add like the Vue's data attributes that they look for. And so then I had Drupal render it like the first time on the page. So the server-side rendering, and then Vue took over and got all the V models, and then it took over and it became a Vue component. And and if you do that, you just need to know the Vue verbose Twig. I don't know, it's not a command, I don't know, whatever the syntax, because
yeah, it's a
Twig and
it's a
Vue
Twig
is the
function.
exact same like Twigly. The handlebar brackets. So it was like, how come this isn't rendering? Are you good?
I got to install the component libraries module.
Okay. So that was super cool, because then any
I definitely did
front-end
this somewhere else
developer, you
last
just say,
night.
hey, build me this Vue component, and then you just slap it on your Drupal site, and all you have to do is just do the mapping like with the width thing. And then we actually used some Yeoman generator to build the components, because each component has like a .twig file, a Sass file, and either that YAML file that he showed or a JSON file, and they're the exact same things, just to fill it with data so you can see it outside of Drupal. And there's a Yeoman generator that was originally built by MediaCurrent, and I forked it because they haven't updated in like a year and a half. And
Cool.
they
So pick it up the pen.
didn't accept my merge requests. But then you just like write a command, and it'll generate those files and add the definition to your theme's libraries YAML, so it loads in the CSS and JavaScript for you. Good?
Yes. It's now showing up the card I defined. I didn't send any preview, so it's not showing anything. I just wanted to show this. So I'm going to go to a recipe. There's display. cool, and I'm going to go to the card view, into add field group, and we're going to say it's going to be a pattern. Call it card. Label. Great, so now I'm going to take the image, drop it in here. Difficulty, do the same thing. And then once you save the grouping, it'll pick up those fields. And then under this pattern, you go to configure it. You're going to pick what pattern you want to use. And now you can decide the field and then the destination from your actual Twig component you define that you can map those fields to. And you can do it multiple times. You can't do, obviously it's a one to many, not the other way around. So you can map the Drupal field once, but you can map as many fields in a component as you want. So then you can just map these here, update, so then just from the GUI you don't have to do any pre-processing to get this to work. You can just sort of create your components, drop in here using field groups, or you can do it at there's a display suite layout module with it, so you can use the layouts, and then there's the views one, so you can use a views to do that same idea.
And I got a dozen different entities that all have a card view mode, and I can just map all of whatever fields I want into that card layout, and then the content manager, or no, well, however,
yeah, I mean,
however you're deciding to use that view mode to display that content, and it just magically happens.
Yeah.
And it all uses the same HTML.
Yeah, it's all the same HTML.
Nice.
So you can so the idea is that you just make all these small little, basically bits of HTML, and then you can just sort of, idea of landing pages, the whole idea is you just piecemeal them together, but from the other side you can use the same setup of using either bricks or even using the layout builder, and you can just have all of the rendering, actually these small little single Twig templates, and then you can just have a library of Twig templates that don't care what Drupal's doing. I mean, you can make Drupal-specific components. Like we did make one that actually is just a component that accepts a couple of fields, and then it also renders a couple of views, and you can actually take those values passed in and pass them into the Twig Drupal view as contextual filters to a view. So you can get like really fancy with it that way.
So then, once you use that field group and told it which pattern to use and then how to map the fields, I'm guessing that the label and format that's on this page right now is kind of meaningless?
No, because it actually passes, it depends on how you want to do your Twig templates. Because all I'm doing is I'm just mapping like, hey, take whatever passes that value and just render it in the Twig template.
Okay, so if you had some kind of embedded component, whatever, you had to render it as responsive image, but if you rendered it as preview or thumbnail or something like that.
Yeah, I would do the same thing.
Then that's what would get passed into your Twig template.
Yep. Because the actual Twig syntax for the 2 bars actually just calls a Twig function called render, and it'll also take Drupal render arrays and render them. So that's the nice part is being a site builder or front-end guy, you don't have to worry about that, especially if like images was the big one we had to have a little bit of a discussion about. Was like we should just leave all of that in Drupal and not touch that, because then you get translations and you get the ARI attributes, you get accessibility, but you can just have a site developer expect like, great, I'm just going to get an image.
And what that thing says is just a string that Drupal rendered. So
whatever values passed to it, it could be a string, a render array, an object.
you just want a render array, right, in the pattern template?
Well, that's what's getting passed. So here, what the actual UI patterns module does is it takes whatever is in content. So it does the usual pre-processing, where it just grabs all of the actual node data, creates the content, grabs a render item essentially for each of those field values. Okay. And what UI patterns does is it takes the matching field from content and just maps it to that field in your Twig template.
So it could be the rendered content, it could be something else.
Yeah. If you're doing it from here, it's always going to be the render array, unless you use like a display suite field and you do your own custom sort of magic there. You could then map that and be whatever you want at that point. You could do something which we've done before, and that is on the very simple pages. If you have like just a plain content type and it's just an event, always looks like this. What we'll do is like you won't have to worry about managed display from a template level. We'll just grab like raw node values in the Twig template. So like truncating and trimming things, Twig tweak is great because it has a whole lot of cool helper functions. And then you're just doing that all at the template level, which is super great because the configuration synchronization is nice, except for when you've got a lot of people always touching the view displays and the form displays, and now you've got multiple people trying to resolve importing and exporting the right configurations. At a template, you just add a new Twig function to do something to the value, and then you move on. So, yeah, that was sort of cool when I learned you could actually do that when I was playing with this. Like, that's because a lot of power to, if you have somebody who's just going to manage it, who, especially for like a person who's maybe comfortable with Drupal but not necessarily a programmer, they can get that same feel without needing to really code anything besides, as long as you know how to do Twig. So yeah, I mean, there's other cool things. UI Patterns has an integration with Pattern Lab and Fractal, so you could actually set up a Pattern Lab system and create everything in there, and then Drupal will pick up those templates and use them, which is also kind of neat. So yeah, that's pretty much what I had prepared. Anybody have any questions about anything else? Any questions on Twig, particularly? Anybody who maybe hasn't touched it a whole lot? It's gone to the days of PHP templating. Cool. All right, that's all I got. Thanks.